Okay, so the first problem that we will be solving this afternoon is this one. So we have a snowmobile what's wrong with this? Wait lang tapos ha. Pangit agad. Okay, so we have a snowmobile with mass. Let me just write the problem of 250 kilograms is exerted with a constant force exerted on it for 60 seconds. Okay. So the snowmobile initial velocity is 6 meters per second and its final velocity is 28 meters per second. Okay, so the first that we were going to calculate is the change in momentum. What is the change in momentum? And then, what is the magnitude of the force exerted? Okay. So we are given with the mass. So, gihatagan tag mass class sa snowmobile, 250 kilograms. So, murag snowmobile is somewhat like a vehicle that is specifically used for snowy nga kanang place. Okay, so mass equals 250 kilograms, and then the time of contact is 60 seconds. And we are also given with the initial velocity and the final velocity. So the final velocity is 28 meters per second, while the initial velocity is 6 meters per second. Okay, so we are asked to find the change in momentum. So when we say change in momentum, we just have to account for the momentum final and then subtract it with the momentum initial. Okay, so in this case, we have m v final minus m times v initial. So we can factor out m. So you have m v minus v naught. So substituting, you have 250 kilograms multiplied by the final velocity, which is 28 meters per second, minus the initial velocity, which is 6 meters per second. So you have 250 kilograms multiplied by 22. So it is equal to 5,500 kilograms meter per second. Okay, so 250 multiplied by 22, that is equivalent to 5,500 kilogram meter per second. So this is the change in momentum. Now, next thing that we will solve is the change in the force exerted, the magnitude of the force exerted. Okay, so what we know is the change in momentum as well as the time. Okay, so from this equation, the momentum impulse theorem, okay, so we know that J is equal to the change in momentum. And then another equation that we know of is that impulse is equal to force times the change in time or the time interval t. So therefore, we can, since we know the change in momentum, then we can use this, or we can equate this equation. So F times delta T is equal to the change in momentum. Hence, we have F is equal to delta P divided by the change in the time interval delta T. So you have 5,500. Nag-calculate mo, class, is it really 5,500? Okay. So
Yes, ma'am.
5,500. Another unit for momentum aside from kilogram meter per second is Newton second. Okay? So you have 5,500 Newton second or kilogram meter per second divided by 60. So we have, pila man ni siya, class?
91.66, ma'am.
Okay, so it's 91.66 Newton. So cancel out ang seconds. So what is left is the unit Newton, the unit of force. Okay, so do you have any question for problem number 1? Another problem, class. Okay, so let's write this one. What is the impulse, or what impulse is needed? What is the needed impulse to stop a 45-gram mass traveling at 42 meters per second? Okay, so these are the given. The mass, which is equal to 0.045 kilogram. So this is your mass converted to kilogram. And then you're also given with the initial velocity, V naught, which is 42 meters per second. And the final velocity. So we want to stop the mass, the 45-gram mass. Nag-move siya from 42 meters per second and we want to stop it. So its final velocity is equal to 0 meter per second. Okay, so what impulse is needed? Now, we know that J is equal to delta P. So we just have to account for the change in momentum. So solution. J is equal to the change in momentum. So you have mv minus v naught. So you have the mass, which is 0.045 kilogram, multiplied by the final velocity, 0, minus the initial velocity, 42 meters per second. So this is equivalent to a negative momentum. So natay negative impulse. Negative change in momentum means nag-decrease ang velocity. So as you can see, from 42 meters per second, nigamay ang velocity, nahimo siyang 0. So a decrease in the velocity signifies a negative impulse. Okay, so it is equal to, pila ni siya, class?
Negative 1.89, ma'am.
Okay, so negative 1.89, the unit is Newton second or kilogram meter per second. Okay? So let's have another problem. How about this one? Which has greater momentum? So you have two options. A 145-gram baseball traveling at 40 meters per second, or 45-gram golf ball traveling at 67 meters per second. Okay, so we are given with both the masses and the velocities of the baseball and the golf ball. So in order to answer this one, kung asa yung mas greater ang momentum, of course, we just have to calculate for their momentum. So the momentum of the baseball is equal to the mass of the baseball, 0.145 kilograms. So i-divide lang na to siya og 1,000, no? Multiplied by 40 meters per second. So pila na siya. And then the momentum of the golf ball is equal to 0.045 kilogram multiplied by 67 meters per second. Okay, so pila man ni siya, class? This is
5.8, ma'am. 5.8, ma'am.
okay, 5.8 kilogram meter per second. And then this one is
3.15, ma'am.
3.15.
3.015. 0.15. 0.15.
Okay, so 3.015 kilogram meter per second. So which is greater? So the momentum of the baseball is greater. Okay? Okay. So let's now have problems involving collision. Okay? So let's have problems involving collision. Okay, how about this one? A 35, is it okay? Red ako isulat?
Yes, ma'am.
Di ra sakit sa mata? Okay, so a 35-gram bullet strikes a 5-kilogram stationary wooden block. And embeds itself in the block. The block and the bullet, the block and the bullet, imagine ninyo, class, the block and the bullet fly off together. So this is a perfectly inelastic collision wherein after the collision, they stick together. And since they're sticking together, the two objects have the same final velocity. So in this case, the bullet and the block has a velocity equal to 8.6 meters per second. Now, what is the original? What is the original? Okay. So what is the original velocity of the bullet? Okay, so we have a system wherein we have two objects. So we have the bullet and then the block. So for the bullet, iyang mass, tawagon na tog M1 equals 0.035 kilogram. So gidivide lang ni siya na tog 1,000. And then ang iyang velocity sa bullet initial kay unknown, wala ta kabalo. Tapos, ang iyang velocity final, V1 prime, equals 8.6 meters per second. Okay? So, muna siya itong mga nahibalaan sa bullet. How about sa block of wood? So, for the block, ang iyang mass, M2, equals 5 kilograms. And then, ang iyang velocity, the velocity class is 0 because it is stationary. Pag mayon gani kag stationary, meaning ana ang iyang velocity kay 0. Okay? So V2 is equal to 0 and then ang final velocity pod sa block is also equal to 8.6 meters per second. Now, in order to calculate the velocity initial of the bullet, we need to use the conservation of momentum. So, according to the conservation of momentum, P before collision is equal to the total momentum after collision. So, let us account for the total momentum before. So, nakay M1, naman kay duha ka objects sa imong system. So, nakay duha ka terms, no? M1 V1 plus ang second term kay M2 V2. And then, after, since this is a perfectly inelastic collision, you have M1 plus M2 multiplied by the final velocity. So, kini si V1 prime equals V2 prime. Pwede rin siya nato isulat as V prime. V prime. Okay? So, nakay V prime here. For perfectly inelastic collision. And then, ang atong gipangita class kay kini si V1. Therefore, nakay M1 V1 equals, ibalhin niya siya na ko sa pikas, M1 plus M2 multiplied by V prime. Kini siya, mahimo siyang minus when we transpose this to the the right hand side of the equation. And then we isolate V1. So you have V1 equals M1 plus M2. So these are just number class kining nasa right hand side, mga numbers ra ni sila. Ato ra ning i-substitute ni mga values later para dili ta maglibog. So you have M2 V2 divided by M1. Okay, so then we substitute our M1 and M2. So nakay M1 which is 0.035 kilogram plus M2 is 5. And then V1, V prime is, kini siya no? 8.6 minus your M2 is 5 multiplied by V2 which is 0 divided by M1 which is 0.035. Okay, so let us evaluate this one. Pila man ni siya class? So most likely, dako gyud ni og velocity ning bullet. Kung makamatay siya class, bisa gamay siya, dako siya momentum kay paspas iyang dagat. Paspas dako iyang velocity. Okay? So, pila man ni siya class? 0 man ni siya diri. You have 8.6 times 5.035 divided by 0.035. Sorry. Kasi nag-calculate pa mo. Okay, so this is equal to, what is the original velocity of the bullet? Sakto ba niya akong nakuha? V1 equals 1237.17 meters per second. Is this correct? Hello class, are you there?
Wala na mo na human og calcu, ma'am, kay na
Oh.
imong gi next.
Okay. Okay, shall we proceed to another problem? Wait, saan ako ang problem class? Let's try an elastic collision. So this is a perfectly inelastic collision wherein the two objects are coupled or they stick together after the collision. So let's try in an elastic collision. Nakita sa ko problem class ha. Nakoy na screenshot na ito nga problem but I have to review my album. Okay, so you have this one. So this is a case wherein the collision is elastic. Okay, so you have, sorry, o siyang i-underline nun, but it doesn't look good. So a 4-kilogram ball moving east at a speed of 5 meters per second strikes a 2-kilogram ball at rest. Calculate at rest. Calculate the velocities of the two balls, assuming an elastic collision. Okay, so we have this problem wherein we are asked to calculate the velocities. So, na siya IES, meaning to say, more than one atong pangitaon nga velocity class. So, unsa nga velocity ang pangitaon? So, what we will calculate are the final velocities of the two balls. Okay? So, si ball number 1 with mass, so this is for ball 1, na siya mass M1 equals 4 kilograms, moving east. So, you have to take note of the sign or the direction also of your velocity class because momentum is a vector quantity. So, since yun man siya east, meaning positive siya to the right. And then, ang iyang velocity or speed, V1, is 5 meters per second. And for ball number 2, V1 prime is unknown. Ball number 2, it has mass equal to 2 kilograms. Ang iyang velocity initial is 0 because it is at rest. And then, wala po kabalo sa iyang final velocity. So, ito siyang pangitaon. Now, since we have two equations, we need, since we have two unknowns, we need two equations. Okay, so dili ni siya nato ma-solve kung katulang conservation of momentum ang ato ang gamiton nga equation. So, we need another equation. So, unsa man nga equation ang pwede nato magamit for elastic collision? So, unsa nga equation class? So, aside from the conservation of momentum, elastic collision, in elastic collision class, sa tanang elastic collision, the kinetic energy is also conserved. Okay? So the kinetic energy for elastic collision is also conserved. So naakay conservation of momentum. And then, napod kay conservation of kinetic energy. So, since we need two equations, then we will use this. Kani silang duha. So, what is the conservation of momentum gani? Na kay M1 V1 plus M2 V2 equals M1 V1 prime plus M2 V2 prime. Okay? And then, for the kinetic energy before is equal to the kinetic energy after. So you have 1/2 M1 V1 squared plus 1/2 M2 V2 squared plus 1 is equal to, sorry, this is equal to, let me just erase this one, is equal to 1/2 the final momentum, the final kinetic energy. So, nakay 1/2 M1 V1 prime squared plus 1/2 M2 V2 prime squared. Okay. So, we have these two equations. Now, kini siya class, mga numbers na ni diri sa left-hand side of the equation, kanilang din siya ang mahabilin nga na mga variables kini sa right-hand side of the equation. However, we can further simplify this one using the coefficient of restitution. So, unsa gito inyong nadumduman? For elastic collision, the coefficient of restitution E is equal to 1. So, review sa atong coefficient of restitution. Nataingan nga equation, E is equal to V final, may notes class. Akong tanawon ha. V
V
final,
final, ma'am, minus V initial.
V final, V1 final minus
V2,
V2 final minus V1 final. Sakto ni?
over this
Over
one, V1.
V1 minus V2. Sakto ba ni siya?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So we will equate this to 1 since for elastic collision, E is equal to 1. So nakay E1 equals V2 prime minus V1 prime divided by V1 minus V2. Therefore, ato ni siyang ibalhin sa right-hand side of the equation. Cross-multiply lang siya nato. So 1 multiplied by this, you have V1 minus V2 equals V2 prime minus V1 prime. Okay, so this will be the equation that we will be using to avoid using the quadratic equation. So kung kinetong gamiton class, we have systems of equation, but makagamit tag quadratic equation ani. So better nga kato na lang coefficient of restitution atong gamiton. Anyway, it is derived from this. Derived hapon to siya ani. Okay? So let's use this and katong sa coefficient of restitution. So you have equation number 1 ni siya nato, this one. And then this will be our equation number 2. So from equation 1, we have M1, kadumdum mo sa M1, 4 mangguro to, no? M1 V1, ilagay ito velocity ni V1, 5.
5, ma'am.
Okay. So 4 times 5 plus 2 times 0, no, at rest man siya, equals 4 V1 prime plus 2 V2 prime. Okay? So, muna siya ito ang first equation na kay 0, kini siya kay 20. So, 20 equals 4 V1 prime plus 2 V2 prime. Okay, so this one. Gikan atong conservation of momentum, nakuha ni siya nato, no? We will call this equation 3. And then, from equation 2, we have V1. V1, pilagay ito si V1, 5. Minus V2, gikan diri, no? V2 is 2. Ay, 0 dahil class, 0. So, ang velocity, sakto ba? V1, 5 minus V2, 0 equals, patakabalo sa value ani, V2 prime minus V1 prime. So, 5 equals V2 prime minus V1 prime. Or we can transfer this one to the other side so that nakay 5 plus V1 prime equals V2 prime. Okay, so we have our equation 4. Now, i-substitute ni nato sa equation 4. Substitute equation 4 to equation 3. Okay. Substitute equation 4 to equation 3. So, kini si V2 diri, kini siya class, ilisan siya nato og 5 plus V1 prime. Kaya parehara mo daw sila, equal mo daw sila. Okay, so you have 20 equals 4 V1 prime plus 2 multiplied by 5. Imbis nga V2 prime ato ang gamiton, para ma-simplify na to, V1 na lang mahabilin nga variable, ilisa na to og 5 plus V1 prime si V2 prime. Okay, so you have 5 plus V1 prime. Kuha ninyo class. So you have 20 equals 4 V1 prime. Isa na lang atong variable. So masolve na ni siya na to ron. 2 times 5 is 10. And then 2 times V sub 1 prime is 2V1 prime. Okay, so i-combine lang din nato ning mga constant. Pwede po ni siya na ito makombine kay parehara mo sila variable. So, na kay 20 minus 10 equals, gibalhin na nako ang 10 sa left-hand side class, na mo siyang negative. And then, kini i-add lang din ako. So, 6. 4 plus 2 kay 6. And then, ang variable ng V1 prime. Okay, so naaka-equation nga 20 minus 10 equals 6V squared. Let us continue this in the next slide. Okay, so here, we can then get V1 prime. So, V1 prime equals, pila man ni siya class?
1.6.
1.67. Sakto?
Yes, ma'am.
Meters per second.
Yes,
So, this is the final velocity of the first ball. Ball number 1. Nakuha na nato yung final velocity. Now, kuha na po dahil nato ang final velocity ni ball number 2 using equation 4. So, from this equation, so nakay 5 plus V1 prime equals V2 prime. Therefore, nakay 5 plus 1.67 equals V2 prime. So, this is equal to 6.67 meters per second equals V2 prime. Okay? So, we have now obtained the final velocities of the two balls using the systems of equation. So, do you have questions? medyo taas ang solusyon basta elastic collision class because kasagara gyud kay duha ang pangitaon nga velocities. Final velocity sa duha ka ball. Okay? So we do not have time na. It's 3:59. But I'm glad nga daghan tang na-solve ng mga problems karon. Okay? So I hope to see you next week. Wala pa may memo for suspension. I do not know, wala pa may kabalo class kung magklase ba next week or dili. Yes?
Afternoon, ma'am.